So today is the February 18th architecture meeting, and go ahead and sign in. I threw the link in the chat. Welcome, Jim and Zach. I know there's a couple others like Sasha and Owen that said they couldn't make it today. So they reviewed the doc earlier, and we'll just go over this real quick. So we've been some of the things that we have been working on last meeting was around application sets and what those mean to us and how that would fit into our world of Ortelius. So today we're going to look at service catalog information, and let me pull that doc up. So when we talk about this, the service catalog, what we're seeing from interviewing customers and people and looking at other open source tools that are out there, people are looking to gather information about a particular microservice. Things that we found, I'm not going to go into real detail on these, but like the build information, the Docker information, what was the commit, and then like who's the owner of the project. If this service breaks, how do we contact that owner as part of that process? So what is really looking at it is from the SRE operations side. Something's broken, I need to get in touch with somebody to go fix it. What the development Slack channel is, or the Discord, the HIP chat that they're using as that process. And then information about the PagerDuty, whether it's the PagerDuty service, the flow for the resolution tree at the service level or at the business service level. PagerDuty has those two different distinctions. Now, one of the things that I put in here, and I don't know how practical it is, but for a microservice, one of the things that we need to look at is being able to point to the logs for that service running in a particular cluster. One of the tricky things about this is a microservice can be deployed to multiple environments. So we can have dev, test, prod, and we can have that service living in those three environments. And then within each one of those environments, we're going to have a number of clusters that they're going to be deployed to. And then within that cluster, there's going to be a log URL. So it's this one-to-end relationship that we need to keep track of. And one of the things on that is being able to really point out from an SRE point of view, here's the log files for this service. We know that this service is having issues. Where can we look at the logs as part of that? So like in the Google world, the GKE world, you know, Google uses Stackdriver as part of that. If we're looking at Kubernetes, maybe a Prometheus log for the cluster. So that's kind of the thought around runtime log URLs. And I was wondering if that makes sense, if anybody has any comments on that. Or if we're going down like the totally wrong tree path on this one. No comments?
Pretty reasonable to me. You know, you've got the traditional logs, which aren't going to have any sort of sensible URL associated with them, but those aren't very meaningful in a long-term sense. So you really want something that's got a URL. A bunch of that stuff lands in S3, but you can put URLs on S3 stuff. So all that seems pretty happy.
Okay, cool. That's what I was hoping, that there'd be some way to reference, you know, get to that. You know, it may not be the ultimate, you know, low level detail of everything that's happening with the service. You know, there may be, you know, the reason why the service is having problems is there's a Nginx load balancer problem, but you know that's causing a downstream problem or something like that. But I think in general, if we could just give some information to make it a little bit easier around that was my goal on that one.
I got a curious question to add in there.
Yeah,
This is Aaron Brooker's my first time. Tracy and I
no
have
problem.
talked a few times. Um, so I always think about it from a perspective of multiple hot deployments with automated failover through something like Istio or console. Some of that observability data, right, from a transactional standpoint of where it went to, right? Because Istio will have that automated failover. So it may be one
Hmm.
transaction it's on the East Coast and then some reason has to fail over. So being able to know where that log is, you really need to know where that transaction went from a historical point of view if there was an issue in that chain.
Yeah, would that be something that we'd want to track or relate? I didn't put it in this, but it does make sense to also track transaction logs, which
If
would
you're
be
trying to
separate
track the
than the
specific thing you're asking,
hmm?
if you're trying to track to like the specific log set that you're asking for a particular microservice, right? Because you could have really n number of replicas, right? If it's a
Yeah,
container-based system, and those n number of replicas could be spread out geographically, you know, in number of clusters.
right. Now would like would it make sense, like for Istio, you could use Kiali to help map out the transaction path. We were looking at there's a webinar yesterday that we around Kepton, which is backed by Dynatrace. So Dynatrace has a lot of that transaction logs. There's a couple other tools. Is that something we could make a relationship or gather that information? I mean, I'm talking really high level. Here's the URL to go. If you're having a transaction problem, or if you want to look at the transaction for this service, here's where you go in this other tool to go get the details. It doesn't make sense for us to try to replicate all those other tools. It's just too monumental of a task.
Yeah,
Um,
it'd be being able to talk with open telemetry, which is going to be based off of what uh, Jaeger tracing did, is, which Datadog operates off of that. I believe Dynatrace has open telemetry tie-ins. Um,
Is that open telemetry? Is that Datadog is open source?
no, open telemetry actually came from Jaeger tracing.
Oh,
The standard came from Jaeger itself.
doesn't Datadog have a CNCF project around this?
They might contribute to open tracing now too. Um,
That's probably what it is.
yeah, I know open telemetry's gotten more popularity as Jaeger's given over some of the pieces, and people like Datadog are using that open telemetry standard um, for their essentially agent or collector.
right.
So you could
And
use Kali or really tie it, point to wherever they want that searching for data. So it could be Kali, could be, yeah, you've got it, Dynatrace, Datadog, whatever.
Would Prometheus fall into the transaction logging, or is that going to be more like a runtime log, the Prometheus?
Prometheus does have a plugin, and I haven't personally got to play with it or time to play with it. It was something we before I switched companies that we wanted to look at, but it does have for tracing the ability to tie into it. I just don't know how it looks.
Right.
Prometheus is predominantly your metric storage, and then something like Grafana would give you a dashboard in front of that, and Grafana can deal with things other than Prometheus as a back end, and so you can get views for some of that stuff through Grafana, but it's not traditionally what Prometheus would be for.
Yeah, you're correct. Sorry, I was thinking Grafana, but because they go
Right.
hand in hand.
No, but Aaron, you are correct. There are log scrape additions that you can plug into Prometheus. I've not experimented with them. I think the other tools are probably better, Splunk, Dynatrace, etc. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Let me put
Because they're just
Splunk in
more
there.
advanced. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'll just put that as a placeholder for now. We'll need to look at if there's basically what we want to do is just provide a one-stop shopping for this detail, and this would probably be along those same lines. a one to n, because I'll put that in there. It may, there's some of these may sit, like Dynatrace will sit across all clusters and stuff like that. So, and look from environment to a trace URL. Perfect. Thanks for the input on that one. Some of the other things that we need to store at the microservice level, key value pairs for the service, and that's think of config maps for the service. Now, we may need to bring in this one. I'm not sure if I have to look into this further. If we're going to have this relationship, if we have multiple environments, each one of them has a cluster, then every cluster needs to have a specific key value pair at that level. That one I have to think about some more.
Yeah, I mean, having this at this level makes sense if you've got some global configuration for a service, but it wouldn't be runtime configuration.
Right, right. And then I've been doing some research on container image dependencies. So specifically ignoring, we're deploying an EAR file out to a Webster server. Even though Ortelius can do that, I'm kind of ignoring that and focusing on the microservice world around containers. So one of the things I found on this front is being able to hook into the output around SNCC. There's one called Dependency Tracker and Cyclone DX that allow us to go ahead and grab the information. Let me see if I still have. I gotta run in here. There it is. So some of the data that I've been playing with. I took our Doxy, which is based on a Golang Hugo server, and I actually tied into our build in as a test. Come on, where's my project? Sorry, all these pop-ups are in the way. Of course, Zoom gets in the way then. All right. So one of the things I found was a way to get the CVEs. This scan I didn't bring in the license, but there's another. Basically, during your build, you can scan the basically all the Golang modules and bring those in the licenses. But just looking at this level of what we have and being able to bring these dependencies in, which version, the license that's associated them, and then their vulnerabilities is what I'm thinking at that level here. So basically, what are the container image dependencies? And I don't know what really to call those dependencies. Right now I'm using the word packages. In the Node.js, I believe they're referred to packages. Golang, they're modules. Python, what are they? Modules. So each language has their own, like, at the OS level, you got the RPM packages, for example. So how to describe these may be something that to make it generic enough could be a challenge. But the idea behind it is be able to go through and grab the package version, the license, and the severity, and the CVEs for that package that are out there. Because one of the things that we found was, like in this case, we have the etcd, and it has the 3 vulnerabilities out there that we found as part of that scanning that we did. Everything else is good as part of that process. So that's some of the other information I was looking at the service catalog level to bring in as part of that. Now, the kind of the decision point on this is we can actually, the tools that scan will spit out a JSON file that's either SPDX format or basically looks like a Cyclone DX format that we can actually load this data and render, save the data in our in Ortelius and be able to manage it ourselves and do it that way. Or we, again, do a link to the tools as part of that process. I'm kind of leaning to where we can do a link, because if somebody runs like a SNCC or something like that, that they could just pass us the URL and we don't have to try to go consume the output as a SNCC a security scan and bring it in, and we're separated by like 4 steps in the build in the process. So I think it'll be easier just to pass along a URL on that front as part of that. So I still working on that one. And
So, Steve, do you have the links to those docs in this doc?
yes, so if you
Okay.
actually go to the our general discussion, here's all the links to the tools.
And your document,
Mhm.
the top document is the one you're referring to that you're
Yeah.
working on.
This is the service catalog document.
Yes, I just want to make sure everybody feels empowered to go into those docs and make suggestions. We do have a couple of new people on today, and we didn't get a chance to introduce them.
Yeah, let me finish up and then we'll go ahead and
Okay.
introduce. Just some last minute coding changes. And then I'm just going to wrap this up. So right now we have this big details box about a lot of this service catalog data. And what I'm proposing is to start splitting it out into smaller boxes as part of that on the UI front. Just so we can kind of move things around, and like on these where we have like a 1 to n, we're going to have a table, tables in the microservice on the UI front. So that will be something that we'll need to work on. And then also we'll back those from a coding standpoint, we'll back those by a microservice ourselves to bring the data back for those tables. Just
Yeah, I think that will be, I think putting them in logical groupings of information will be helpful.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, right now I'm like, where is that? It's getting too much.
So some of the new tables that we'll have in Ortelius in the component details are going to be like the runtime logs. These are, the environment, the endpoint, and there's the log file for it. And then the dependencies along those lines as well. So, and then
you're starting to create issues.
That's
right?
what I'm going to start to make sure that we track all this and start. If this looks good for everybody, if we get a nod to go ahead with it, I'll start going and putting the issues in on what needs to be changes.
Yeah, so let's make sure this stays out, that it's out there for everybody to look at and make comments on.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Christopher, this vars table, basically it's like a key value table. So the nice thing about it is we can keep on adding whatever we want to it without having to change the, so there's a row for every attribute basically. So that's one thing that we can keep on adding to without having to make table changes on that front. Some of the table changes that we'll need are the relationships to like the runtime logs and what I'm calling packages now at the container level.
And Steve, do you think that's something that this team should do, or should we get Phil to make those table changes?
We can make the table changes. They're relatively small.
Okay.
These are basically the columns that we have to deal with. So they're not complicated table changes at all. So let me go back to architecture. So all the links to the docs, and I'll be creating the once we all say, yeah, this looks good to go, I'll start creating the issues in the Ortelius repo. Most of the coding changes will be Java. Let me put in here, and Python. Will be Java, JavaScript, Python, and some database changes. New reports and tables will back with a microservice, probably written in Python. That's what we've been doing lately.
And you don't, what if somebody wants to write in Go? Is that okay if it's in a microservice?
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't you add Go up there? Because I know there's some folks I've spoken to who want to start using Go.
Yeah. And then take a look at the Cyclone. So the dependency tracker, the UI I was showing you with the CVEs, that takes information or gets loaded in from Cyclone DX. Cyclone DX seems to be like one of the best and the most accurate, from what I could tell, scanning tools that I found that's open source. And it'll kick out not only its own format, but also SPDX format. That's kind of more of a, SPDX is more of an industry standard. From what I can tell, SPDX is out of the CNCF side. And then finally, the Hugo website. So the Hugo version of our website is up and running on that URL. So we need to do some work on that front, on styling and getting the content moved over from the WordPress one. And we just need to get that done before the 15th because our renewal is expiring on SiteGround for the WordPress version. There's the repo, and that's all I have for today. So let's go ahead and I know, like Tracy said, there's a few new people.
Yeah, first of all, I want to welcome Christopher back. We were all worried about you, Christopher. It's like, oh, he doesn't have COVID.
No diseases. Thank you.
Good. And then we have two individuals who've joined this call that have some pretty, I would say that they're heavy hitters in the Kubernetes world, Jim Stock and Aaron Bruckner. So welcome. Why don't you, Jim, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jim Stock, and I've spent a little while doing infrastructure, whatever, and then all kinds of stuff with infrastructure, measurement, monitoring, diagnosis, whatever. And then I started getting into Hadoop, Yarn, Apache Spark, Kafka environment, implemented Prometheus there, and then did it in a Kubernetes private cloud at General Motors. So I am reasonably well acquainted with Kubernetes and that stuff, but I've just done measurement, problem diagnosis, triage, all of that stuff, operational support after architecture is done and thrown over the wall for a long time, which is why I mentioned a couple of weeks ago the point about the catalog or the ITSM data structure to understand and how to map, right? So Splunk, whatever you use to detect a log file, you got to be able to track that to something. Mm-hmm. And as you're talking about key value pairs and all that stuff, people need to think about that. Obviously, you guys are aware of that, right? But as part of your engineering process, prior to deployment, you got to know how are you going to create those relationships and connect the dots. Even if you use Dynatrace, Dynatrace has multiple different layers that go fetch disparate data, and how you're going to reconnect that and then make it useful to a software developer, an operations person running a command center, an architect to understand what did he do wrong in his design. You know, there's lots of different layers. Everybody needs pretty much the same data, maybe graphed differently, but the relationships of what does this data mean to the company is, I think, really paramount. We can get all kinds of data, and if it's in 1,000 different dashboards that don't connect and aren't easy to find, having all that data is not very useful.
Yeah, and that's one thing I forgot to mention is at the microservice level, all that service
Mhm.
catalog data, we'll roll that up to the logical version of the application as well. So the number of vulnerabilities, the licenses that are being consumed, metrics, those types of things will roll up to the logical application version.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you got to have it at the component tier or the app. What was the name that you guys are inventing? The application. Oh man.
Yeah,
It's a great
right now
We're
we're calling
concept.
it
struggling.
application version. It's
No,
probably going
no.
to get moved over to a product version.
Components and then applications.
Yeah, but the new tier, when you're breaking down the
Oh,
logical architecture of an application,
component sets.
yes, yeah, or application sets. Yep, yep. And so I mean, logically, we all can see here's the hierarchy in a microservice, cloud, Kubernetes, whatever you want to call it, environment. The question is each individual corporation has to agree upon a certain language and then kind of follow the rules with that, right? So ITSM makes that really simple because once your catalog is sort of named and you understand what those names apply to, then you just start mapping stuff, whether it's auto discovery or it's hard coded somewhere. There's lots of different ways to do it, and there's going to be different requirements. Some stuff can't be YAML key pair, key value pairs. Some of it's going to have to be auto discovered by Nginx, Istio, whatever, right? So, yep. All right.
Perfect.
Enough
Thank
talk.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Everybody will learn. He's voyeuristic in terms of trying out new things and learning new things. So we're glad to have you because I think we have kind of a variety of people here, and having more people on the operations side and giving us feedback will be super helpful. And Aaron is the same way. Aaron is another heavy hitter. He has his resume is pretty vast in terms of tools and stuff he's played on. So Aaron, why don't you take it away?
Sure. So I'm Aaron. I've been dealing with microservices and helping. Previously was at State Farm on the claim side, which is the busiest side. I like to tell people because that's where everything gets interacted with at a large scale. But helping define and build what that microservice ecosystem looks like and what makes sense versus the traditional service-oriented architecture. So I spent several years, a couple years doing that. And then I really kind of, throughout my history of working on service-oriented architectures and supporting them, transitioned into really getting the SRE practice started and helping people understand, how do we deploy? How do we architect not only, hey, we gotta be multiple places, but how do we architect, what do our clusters look like? What do we start building from a failover? So that's why when you say we want to trace something, it's like, well, it could be one of N, right? And based on what type of reliability we need for the cost that we're willing to put out for that reliability is where these things sit. And so I was doing SRE in a hybrid cloud. So basically across at the time was AWS and our own on-prem cloud, and really starting that journey and showing them how in-depth Kubernetes we can basically do a bunch of things. So Jim would like it. I was actually a major push for single source of truth, whether it was your logs, whether it was your observability data, right? How your services are running. Everything should be in the same place, regardless whether it's spread across clouds. So that way we can actually correlate data, right, and do our jobs.
Exactly.
It's crazy, but sometimes people looked at me like I was crazy. It's like, guys, if we lose tracking, whether it crosses a boundary is a big deal. Um, that and so at American Express, to forward that, doing many things in the SRE world, that's where my thing comes in Kubernetes and really helping Kubernetes and the American Express do their cloud journey from a security perspective. Most people don't necessarily tie SRE and security together, but they are very closely related in a lot of ways. Because SRE should know how everything runs in and out, and then security asks the question, and you're like, no, we can't do it that way, but we can do it this way. So I spend a lot of time. That's what I spend my time on right now. And American Express is helping secure the journey to their hybrid cloud. their journey to using Kubernetes and why you may use vanilla over some of the other ones because they may put limitations on there, right? And it'll be something I'll probably track as you get into some more financial techs, that they're going to want to be able to track not just the microservices, but how are we controlling the communication between microservices, even in a cluster, right? So stuff like Istio authorization policies, network policies, um, so on and so forth across that board, because they have to answer to auditors, right? Like they have to answer to the government in and of itself, which is fun and challenging at the same time. But that's the big background I bring is microservices, hybrid cloud, and all the fintech fun stuff of control mechanisms that, whether we like it or not, is what we have to do.
Yeah, yep, definitely. And there's one other name I don't recognize, Zach. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Zach Jones. Started my career actually in a manufacturing facility, designing like automated inspection systems. So a lot more like physical controls oriented type stuff. So always been interested in automation, and then that eventually led me into an SRE role. And that's pretty much what I do now at my company, CloudFit. We predominantly do it's more onboarding of like we'll just say government organizations, particularly DoD, into the cloud. So do a lot of work in, mainly Azure, so Azure US government, but then there's secret and top secret clouds beyond that, and Azure Stacks, so a totally disconnected instance. So yeah, so there's that onboarding piece of just to the cloud in general, but as I'm sure a lot of you already know, the government tends to lag behind in many different ways when it comes to technology. So kind of the second hat I wear is, kind of introducing these entities to really just Kubernetes in general, or containers. A lot of them just, haven't even had experience with Docker. So kind of showing them the power of the possible, so to speak. And the real goal there is to, expose them to, methodologies and practices that, you can build a pipeline with, so to speak, and that pipeline can have an authority to operate in these restricted environments. And then all code pushed through can kind of be grandfathered into an authority to operate. So we call that continuous ATO. But it's basically, the whole purpose of it is to, make it to where necessary changes to, like, let's say jets or weapon systems or whatever don't take months to get out. They can get out, as soon as we need them. So that's kind of where I'm at. Just a lot of work in secure environments, and yeah, happy to be here. And yeah.
Well, welcome
Well,
everybody.
Welcome everybody. And I did
yeah.
put the link to our Discord channel. If you guys want to join that, there's a couple categories. There's the general one, then the a dev channel for where we take it a little more deeper on discussions. And we're on the Discord channels. It's just not limited to Ortelius. We help each other out with problems and try to find solutions for what you're doing at work or what you're playing on. It's always interesting to us. So we're one big family trying to move things along here, because things can get really technical really quick, we found.
They do. That's why it's great to have some new folks and those that are really digging into Kubernetes. And I think, Zach, didn't you work with Spring before?
Like Java Spring, the framework. Yeah, I did work as a Java developer for about 2 years.
It makes it interesting because a lot of Spring, they have doesn't it have a registry at the cluster level for APIs?
Good question. So I actually have no idea. When I was working with Spring, it was right after that what was it? It was that huge Equifax security thing that was
Yeah.
related to struts. So
Yeah.
that was my experience, was migrating from struts to Spring, and it wasn't a containerized application.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I got out of that pretty fast. Did not enjoy that role.
What was your question again, Tracy? I might.
I was just curious about Spring, and I thought that they, as an API kind of gateway, it had a registry at the cluster level.
I don't know if Spring does or Spring Boot does by itself, because it just creates a memory standpoint through annotations within inside of it. It has to be a different deployment, right? So Spring works with an inversion of control memory space on top of the JVM.
I think you hook in Eureka into that.
Yeah, there are other deployments like your I think you're right. It is Eureka, which I think was that something Netflix did?
Yeah, that's a Netflix. And I can't remember if it's a pub sub type of, or if it's auto discovery of the services. I think Eureka does an auto discovery of the services. And I don't remember if there's Spring services or any type of service in the Java world.
Yeah, they just call hook from Git, and then they know where to publish to service discoveries, and they register, and then you have a centralized gateway that manage all the redirections so far.
Okay.
So more Java, HTTP proxies and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, but most of your major ones have CRDs and Kubernetes. So like Glue and Ambassador have CRDs for Kubernetes that you would define your entry into the proxy, and it's all managed through that way.
Yeah, usually they overlap when you're bringing Spring Boot applications to Kubernetes. Always there is a thing when you start talking about services, and always the Netflix OSS is a thing because they do more things, but it still overlaps with Kubernetes. So usually we just move out. We just quit using this discovery serving and stuff that Spring Boot uses because it's not really powerful on Kubernetes.
Well, and it doesn't help in a multi-language paradigm of people doing microservices in different languages.
Yeah. Well, I get a lot of questions on that in particular, and if there's any integration we're doing at the pulling the transactions from the API gateway. I've not gone down that road to think about how to do that, but I bring it up so we can think about if that's something we want. But it is language specific. And on another note, Sergio, I like the gold background on the Evil Lord.
That's my fault, right? We've been talking.
So I think that if you have something you can send me and let me play with it and see what it looks like posted around, I'm happy to do that. But I think the gold background on the Evil Lord would be is good, and we might only need that badge and have different names on it.
Yeah, I was thinking like I think it's good enough. Like maybe just changing background is going to be enough and the name because yeah, it's look okay. Or other way we are going to like thinking about like how to modify the appearance of this guy every time we need to relate it to some kind of level or collaboration.
I think we're at beginning. We're just going to do 2 badges. I'm not sure what those badges are going to be, just to get us walking before we run. So I think that I can work from that, from your Evil Lord with a gold background. I want to see what kind of wording I can put on it. So if you have something you can send me, I'll play with it.
Okay, I'm going to add the background and I will send it to you.
Okay. All right, everybody, huge thanks. And on one final note, we did have a really interesting CDF meetup yesterday with Captain. I will post it when I get it uploaded. I will post it out on the Discord channel. It's really interesting in how Captain is changing the CI/CD world into something that has a kind of a control plane listener to fire off events. And it's something I think we, as we watch CI/CD morph into something more intelligent, that we're probably going to see more tools like that. And it could be something we could leverage.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the extra 15 minutes, all. And thank you for everybody who's new and old or recent. Nobody's old.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
A good day.
Cheers. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.